What's up, guys? Today is March the 15th and we are one day away from Selection Sunday. Today we're going to be discussing three different topics in my third video. Number one, who's the number one overall seed? Number two, who's the last number one seed? And number three, we're going to be taking a couple bubble teams and comparing them against each other, showing you what we look at, and that sort of thing. So let's do it. Here we go. The two teams competing for the number one overall spot in this year's tournament are Florida and Arizona. They're very similar in a lot of different ways. Neither of them have any bad losses. Arizona's top 50 record is 11-2, 20-3 against the top 100. Florida's 8-2 against the top 50 and 17-2 versus the top 100, which is pretty similar. I would give Arizona the slight edge in that category. If you remember from my last video, I coined a phrase NOAA, which is neutral or away wins. So Arizona's NOAA record against the top 70, so neutral away wins against the top 70 teams, is 9-3. Florida's 5-2. So those are fairly similar. Once again, though I'd give the slight edge to Arizona. Strength of schedule: Arizona 53, Florida 72. That has a large part to do with Arizona playing in the Pac-12 and Arizona playing in the SEC. Once again, slight edge to Arizona. But really, the main reason why Arizona should be number one is they have better NOAA wins. Arizona has beaten Duke at a neutral site, who's currently a 2 seed according to Joe Lunardi, at Michigan, another 2 seed, at San Diego State, a 4 seed, and at UCLA, a 6 seed. Comparing that with Florida, Florida has its best win at Kentucky, which is a 6 seed, at Tennessee, 11 seed, neutral site win versus Memphis, an 8 seed, and their fourth best win is at Arkansas, who is currently out, according to Joe Lunardi. So Arizona has just proven that they can beat the very best teams more consistently, so I would trust them more in the Elite Eight, in the Final Four, and I think they deserve to be rewarded for those wins. There are some arguments for Florida. One, they have less losses. Two, they have won more games recently. They've won more games in a row. And they also, you could argue, I guess, that they have better losses. Florida's 2 losses have come at Wisconsin, who's currently a 2 seed, and at UConn, who's a 5 seed. Arizona's losses have come at Arizona State, a 10 seed, at Oregon, an 8 seed, and at Cal, who is currently out, according to Joe Lunardi. Of course, I think the argument against that theory is that Arizona has played a better schedule and has had more chances to lose against these type of teams. The less losses, I think, is one less loss. I don't think really matters that much. And while the tournament committee does look at how a team is doing more recently, I think theoretically they do look at the overall body of work. And just because the team lost more recently doesn't mean necessarily they should be voted or considered a worse team. So also, Wichita State, of course, has an argument here why they shouldn't be the one seed. Just looking at their NOAA record against the top 70, they are 2-0, so they've only played 2 games on the road or at neutral sites versus the top 70 teams, which isn't that many. They've beaten BYU, a number 11 seed, and at St. Louis, number 7 seed. So this just doesn't compete with Arizona or Florida and what we've seen them do. So they are 1 seed. Their 30-4, their 34-0 record is quite an accomplishment, but I just don't think that they're going to get or even have a chance at a top seed, even if Arizona or Florida lose. I think the number 1 overall seed is going to belong to one of those 2 teams. So the next topic is on the last number 1 seed, and that's coming up right now. So the last number 1 seed is a very interesting debate right now. The top 3 seeds are pretty much already typed in already for certain. Even if Florida or Arizona lose today, they're going to be a top seed. Obviously, Wichita State is they're done playing, so they're going to be a top seed. But the race for the last number 1 spot is very interesting. I think it's between 3 teams, and I'll skip all the rationale I had for why these teams are in consideration, considering it would take me too much time. But really quickly, they are Wisconsin, Michigan, and Villanova. Villanova really had the inside track to that until they lost to Seton Hall in the Big East tournament. This has opened it up to Wisconsin, Michigan. I've always, if you followed my first video, thought that Wisconsin should be the number one, the fourth number one seed. But right now, I don't think they're going to get it unless they win the Big Ten. I think the same thing can be said of Michigan. Both have very impressive resumes. Wisconsin's 18-2 versus top 50, 19-5 versus top 100. They're 8-3 against top 70 on neutral or away sites, no wins, which is very impressive. They've beaten Virginia at Michigan, neutral site win St. Louis at Iowa. Michigan also has been quite impressive, 8-4 versus the top 70. Neutral away sites. They have beaten Wisconsin on the road, Michigan State on the road, Ohio State on the road, neutral site win against Stanford. So I think if either of those teams win the Big Ten, they are going to get that last number one spot. Villanova is 7-2 against the top 70 on a neutral or away site. However, I think that's a little bit deceiving. If you look at their best wins, their top one is neutral. Win against Kansas, which is obviously a really great win, but the next best one is neutral Iowa, then at Xavier, and then at St. John's. So not quite the quality wins on the road or at neutral sites that Michigan or Wisconsin have. They do have a better record, 28-4. They play in a decent conference, not quite as good as the Big Ten, obviously. So it's going to be close either way, but I think with the momentum Wisconsin and Michigan has been building recently, that if either of those teams win the Big Ten, especially with the fact they're going to pick up 2 more quality wins in the semis and finals of that tournament, I think that's going to be our number one. If they don't win, if neither of those teams wins, Ohio State or Michigan State wins the Big Ten, I think it's Villanova's probably. If Virginia wins the ACC, it could be close, but if you look at Virginia's resume, they really have top-loaded their home wins and don't have that many quality no wins. They do have, they are 6-4 against the top 70 on neutral or away sites, but their best win is at Pittsburgh, then neutral versus SMU. And those are 9 and 10 seeds respectively, according to Joe Lunardi. So not great wins per se. So we're going to wait it out till tomorrow and see what happens. So when we take both teams and compare them, decide who's going to make the tournament, there's a lot of things that are weighed in on, and people have different ways of deciding it. That's really important to understand, that there's not one way that the committee decides who makes the tournament. It's really a collection of different thoughts and opinions. But typically, a lot of the heated discussions include teams that have a lot of bad losses and a lot of good wins versus teams that have no bad losses but few good wins. I definitely have a strong opinion on that debate, and I'll just discuss that later. Second is strength of schedule. Some teams have a lot of wins, upper 20s, but terrible strength of schedule, while other teams, may only have 20 wins but a really good strength of schedule. So it's hard to compare those teams. And then obviously the overall body of work versus recent games. As I mentioned before, the tournament committee should take into account the entire overall resume, but a lot of times they look at how they finished at the end of the season, how they finished in conference tournaments. So just for fun, I've randomly picked 6 bowl teams and placed them in competition with each other, 1 versus 1. We're going to do 3 of these. First is Arkansas and Southern Miss. Looking at Arkansas, they have a record of 21-11. They are 3-3 versus the top 50, 9-9 versus the top 100, so pretty even there. They have 2 bad losses at A&M and a neutral site versus South Carolina, both below 100 in the BPI. They're 2-5 against the top 70 on neutral away sites. They do have a win at Kentucky, which is really the only reason why they're a bubble team, to be honest with you. That really saved them. We're comparing them to Southern Miss, who's 27-6, 1-2 versus the top 50, 5-4 versus the top 100. So pretty similar to Arkansas in that degree. They also have a couple bad losses at Western Kentucky, 173rd in the BPI, and at UAB, 158th in the BPI. Their top 70 record versus neutral away teams is 1-2. So once again, not that unsimilar from Arkansas, but their best win is at North Dakota State. So the fact that Arkansas, everything else being fairly similar, Arkansas having that win at Kentucky and a neutral site win versus Minnesota is really the reason why Arkansas would be chosen over Southern Miss. Southern Miss just doesn't have, that great win at Kentucky that Arkansas does, and everything else is pretty similar, and neither of these teams have outstanding resumes, so I think you have to go with Arkansas. Number 2, BYU versus Providence. BYU is 23-11. BYU is an interesting case because it has a bunch of bad losses, but also a bunch of good wins. So like I was talking about earlier, we're going to have this discussion, especially against Providence, who has no bad losses, but not very many good wins. But BYU has lost to Loyola Marymount, Pepperdine, Portland, and Pacific, all teams below 100 in the BPI. But they are 3-6 versus the top 70 at neutral away sites. They have beaten Stanford, a number 9 seed, Texas, a number 7 seed, and at St. Mary's, who was on the outside fringe of the bubble. But those are all pretty good wins, especially against Texas and Stanford. Comparing them to Providence, we're going to assume that Providence loses to Creighton tonight, because if they win, they're obviously going to be in anyway. But if they lose to Creighton, they will be 22-12. Top 50, they'll be 4-9. Top 100, 11-12. So BYU does beat them in that category. They have no bad losses, which is, like I said, that's, if you're a tournament committee, do you look at those 4 bad losses from BYU and say, Providence doesn't have any bad losses, I think I'm going to take them over them? Or do you look at the good wins that BYU has versus Providence? Providence's best wins are at St. John's and neutral site recently in the Big East tournament versus St. John's. They're only 2-8 versus the top 70 neutral away sites, so they have just not won any games on neutral away sites. They've won all their big games at home. So given these circumstances, when you're a bubble team, you're going to be playing only good teams. You're going to be seeded at the 12 spot, 11 spot, or maybe 10 spot. So you're only going to be playing teams that are 5, 6, or 7 seeded, which are all teams in the top 50. So I think you really have to overlook the bad losses and pick the teams that have beaten good teams on the road or a neutral site. So that's why I think BYU gets the edge here. Like I said, they've proven that they can beat against beaten teams against Stanford and Texas, so I think you have to pick them and hope they don't play a bad game as they did 4 times this season. Last but not least, we're going to look at Dayton versus Nebraska. Dayton is 23-10, 4-3 in the top 50, 9-7 in the top 100. They have, once again, also some bad losses at Illinois State versus USC and at Rhode Island. Their top 70 record versus neutral or away top 70 teams, I said that wrong, is 3-3. They do have a lot of good wins at St. Louis, neutral versus Gonzaga, and neutral versus California, so a bunch of pretty solid wins. They're 500 when they play top 70 teams on the road or neutral site, so they can win those big games. Comparing them with Nebraska, kind of similar to Providence, except they do have one bad loss, neutral site UAB. They are only 2-8 against the top 70 at neutral away site. So this is another team that just can't seem to win on the road versus good teams. They have a good Big Ten record, mostly because they've taken care of business at home. But that does not necessarily show a team that can win in March. Their best win, which kind of keeps them in the conversation, is at Michigan State, 4 seed. That's the best win out of any of these teams we reviewed so far. They also have beaten Indiana, which is not that great of a win, but They are a solid team. So I think you have to once again go with Dayton because they have shown that they can beat teams like Gonzaga and St. Louis on the road or at neutral sites. Nebraska just has not shown that as consistently. So that's the end of today's video. Check back tomorrow. I'm going to be doing a video on selecting the bubble teams. And then once again, check back Monday. I'm going to have a big selection show breaking down the entire bracket, as well as showing you some statistics over the last 5 years that I think will help you with your bracket. So we'll see you soon.